What's best, a Roth or traditional retirement account? How does a Roth allow you to save more for retirement than a pre-tax account? And how can you get Morningstar's premium membership for free? We'll answer these questions and more on this, the 90th episode of the DoughRoller Podcast.
Welcome to the DoughRoller Podcast, where the best thing money can buy is financial freedom. We help you make more, spend less, and invest the rest. And now your host, Rob Berger.
Whether you're just starting out, buried under a mountain of debt, or well on your way to financial freedom, this is the podcast to help you take your finances to the next level. Hey, everybody, this podcast is sponsored by Betterment, the most preferred automated investing service. Betterment has cutting-edge technology to optimize returns, minimize taxes, and save you time and money. Join over 34,000 customers who have already streamlined their portfolio management at betterment.com/roller. That's betterment.com/ROLLER. So today we're going to dive into an issue that I received just tons and tons of emails on, and that is what's best, a Roth retirement account, a Roth 401k or Roth IRA, or a pre-tax, or sometimes referred to as a traditional 401k or IRA. What's best? Which one should we use? How do we figure it out? I get it's probably the most. If I were to boil all the questions down, I probably get more on this topic than just about anything else. So what I thought I'd do is today walk through sort of the general rules of thumb that I follow, but then follow it up, of course, with some math so you can understand why I believe what I believe and how I approach this question. Obviously, you'll need to think it through for yourself and make your own decisions. But I want to share with you kind of how I work through it. And so that's what we're going to do today. Before I get to that, though, got a great email from a listener named Lauren. She's actually indicated she's, I guess, preparing to maybe launch a personal finance blog. So that'll be fun. I'll look forward to that. But she wrote, this is just a part of her email, but she said, she was referring to my podcast on the Morningstar Portfolio Monitor, which is podcast 86. It's a great investing tool to monitor your investments. You can check that out, DoughRoller.net/podcast 86. But here's what she said. She says, have you played around with their X-ray tool, another excellent tool that uses your portfolio and shows where the stocks and all your funds overlap? Then she said in parentheses, who knew I owned Google stock in like 4 different funds? Check that out too. And then she went on and she said, I did want to point out one thing about the premium membership in Morningstar. There are some investment firms, apparently T. Rowe Price is one of them, that provide a premium membership free to their investors who have a minimum amount invested with them. But even if I had to pay for it, I would. It's wonderful. So a couple of things there. First, Lauren, thanks so much for pointing that out. I did not realize that some investment firms like apparently T. Rowe Price, if you have enough invested with them, will pay for a premium membership. Certainly if you are with T. Rowe Price, and if you're not, check out others to see if they offer a free Morningstar premium membership, something you would definitely want to take advantage of. And if you know of other ways to get Morningstar's premium membership for free, please shoot me an email, dr@doughroller.net. I will absolutely pass it on to everybody. In terms of the X-ray tool, and this may be something I could probably devote an entire podcast to, it is an excellent tool. It shows you what your mutual funds own. And it'll show you for your entire portfolio how much you own in whatever stock. And, it can be a great way to see just how diversified you are. I mean, as Lauren pointed out, she owns Google stock in 4 different funds, which in and of itself isn't an issue, although, if that's true of many other stocks as well, it may suggest that she has maybe not as much diversification, although that may not be the case either. For example, you may have a 401k and you've got an S&P 500 index fund there, and then you've got one in your taxable account, maybe you've got one in your IRA, and that's just part of your overall asset allocation plan, and you have to have that similar fund in a number of different places. Well, you're going to have, when you do a Morningstar X-ray, you're going to see the same stocks effectively in each of those funds. So it's not necessarily an issue, but it could be, and it's worth checking out. So if you have the premium membership, or if you get it, the X-ray tool, as Lauren pointed out, is a great tool. And I appreciate, Lauren, for you pointing that out for us. All right, so today we got a big day. This one's, it took me a while to put this one together, but it's such an important topic. My goal is, I'm going to record this podcast. I'm going to publish the show notes, DoughRoller.net/podcast90, podcast 90. That's where the show notes will be. And then when anyone emails me and asks me, so Roth versus traditional, what's best? I can say, hey, I got a podcast for you and some show notes. Check it out. That's my opinion. So here we go. So as a starting point, let's just make sure we're all on the same page as we understand what the difference is between a Roth and what I'll call a traditional or pre-tax IRA or 401k. So with a traditional 401k, for example, you'll put in pre-tax dollars. In other words, if you put in $10,000 into a traditional 401k, you will not pay income tax on that $10,000. That will be excluded from your taxable income. That's also true with an IRA that is deductible. If you have an IRA and you're able to deduct it, and there's rules about who can deduct their IRA contributions and who cannot, depends on your income and whether you have a retirement plan at work. But those would all be what I would lump in as traditional or pre-tax retirement plans. You don't pay taxes on the contributions. That's the good news. The bad news is, fast forward any number of years to when you retire, and when you do start to take money out, you will pay taxes. You will pay ordinary income tax, and if you're in a state that has income tax, when you're in retirement, you'll pay state income tax as well on 100% of the money. That's a traditional IRA or a traditional 401k. So how does that compare to a Roth? Well, the Roth, you don't get any tax breaks when you make your contribution. You are using after-tax dollars, no different than if you'd put money in a taxable account. You've paid Uncle Sam. You've paid state income tax if you have state income tax where you live. You're dealing with after-tax dollars, and you can invest those in a Roth IRA. There's a Roth 401k, Roth 403b. That's the bad news, right? No tax benefits at the time of the contribution. What's the good news? Well, the money grows tax-free. Tax-free, not tax-deferred, tax-free. So you will not pay a nickel in taxes on any of the earnings in your Roth accounts. So that when you retire 10, 20, 40 years from now, and you start taking money out, you will take it out tax-free. Now, there are some other differences between a Roth and a traditional, and they can be very important. They're not really the subject so much of today's episode. But for example, with a traditional IRA or 401k, when you hit a certain age, 70 and a half, you have to start making what are called required minimum distributions. You're forced to take money out, a certain amount. There's a calculation to figure out how much. The government effectively does that in effect to force you to pay taxes, right? They give you a tax break, but they don't want to give you a tax break forever. Well, with a Roth, of course, when you take money out, you're not taxed on it, right? So the government doesn't care when you take your money out of a Roth. So there is no required minimum distribution with a Roth. And that can have some interesting implications, actually for taxes, but also if you want to leave money to your children or your grandchildren. Sometimes a Roth IRA can be a great way to do it. Now, I point that out just to say there are other differences beyond what we're going to talk about today between a Roth and a traditional retirement account. But today we're going to focus on which one should you use as it relates to effectively taxes and which one will, really what we want to know is this: which one should I use to end up with more money after tax in retirement? Okay, so that's our goal today. And I want to start with sort of my approach, my general rules of thumb. So here they go. If you're in the lower two tax brackets, federal tax brackets, remember our federal income tax is progressive. It goes up as you make more money, right? So the tax brackets for 2014 start at 10%. They go all the way up to 39.6. Well, if you're in the two lower tax brackets, which are 10 and 15%, my view is you are generally better off with a Roth. If you do pre-tax, you're not going to save that much money because you're in the lower tax rates. And particularly if you're younger and you're just starting out, as you move up in your career and you make more and more money as you get older and into retirement, you could end up, I think, the odds are paying more in taxes than you do when you're just starting out and you're in the lower tax bracket. So in my general rule of thumb is if you're in the lower two tax brackets, generally, and there are always exceptions, but generally you're better off with a Roth. If you're in the middle three tax brackets, 25, 28, 33%, it's more of a crapshoot. I think in the lower end of that range, what I would choose is probably a Roth. As I moved up in that sort of middle tier of tax brackets, I would be starting to lean more towards traditional. I might do a combination, right? It's not all or nothing. You can have some of your contributions go to a Roth, some go to a traditional. So I might start to look at maybe doing a little bit of both. And then as you hit the higher two tax brackets, 35 and 39.6%, it's my view that you are, in most cases, better off with a traditional pre-tax, tax-deductible contributions because you're saving a bundle given your high tax rates. Now, what I'm going to do today is actually put some numbers on this. General rules of thumb are great, but my goal in this is to arm you with information so that you can think through these issues on your own, and you can either make a decision that's best for you or decide, no, I need some professional help and hire a certified financial a CFP or someone else who's experienced in dealing with retirement accounts like this to help you make that decision. And so that's my goal. It's not just to give you some rule of thumb and off you go and best of luck and maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, right? But to actually kind of dig into the details and show you kind of why I believe what I believe. So we're going to walk through some numbers. Before we do that, though, we got to talk about taxes for a moment. So here's the general thinking on a Roth versus traditional. What people want to try to figure out is the taxes that I would save now from a traditional retirement account, how are those going to compare to the taxes I'll pay in retirement? Are my taxes higher today than they will be when I retire, or are they lower today than when I'll retire? And so the theory generally is if my taxes are lower today than they will be when I retire, I'm better off with a Roth because I'll avoid the high taxes in retirement. And since my taxes are lower now, I wouldn't get much benefit from a pre-tax retirement account anyway. On the other hand, if your taxes are higher today than you think they will be in retirement, the reverse is true. And it's probably best to take advantage of those traditional retirement accounts now because you're going to save a bundle given your high tax rates. Now, where's the problem? The problem is we know what our taxes are now. How do we know what our taxes are going to be 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now? We don't. It's at best a guesstimate, right? But here's some things to think about. First of all, your state income tax matter, not just your federal income tax. Some of you live in whatever states like California, for example, very high income tax. Some of you live in Tennessee, where there is no state income tax. So your state income tax matters both now in your working years and when you retire. Some people, live in New York with a high tax rate, and they retire in Florida, where there is no income tax. Now, you may not know all the answers. You may not know where you're going to move when you retire. You maybe have an idea, maybe you have no clue, right? But the key here is it's not just about your federal income tax. You got to think about your state income tax too. It affects the evaluation. That's the first thing. The second thing is, we talk in terms of federal income tax. We talk about the marginal rate and the effective rate. So the marginal rate is the highest rate you pay on that last dollar you earn. As you make more and more, you move up the tax bracket, 10%, 15, 25, 28, 33. Maybe you're all the way up at 39.6%. But that's your marginal tax rate would be the tax you pay on your last dollar of taxable income, right? The effective tax rate is different. That takes your total tax liability and divides it by your income. And that, of course, is going to be lower than your marginal tax rate because, even if you're in the top tax bracket of 39.6%, not 100% of your taxable income is going to be taxed at that rate, right? You're still only taxed at 10% for your first, let's see here, if you're single, your first $9,075, right? And then up to $36,900, it's taxed at 15%. That's true whether you're making $100,000 or you're Warren Buffett. He's only going to pay 10% on his first $9,075, assuming he's a single taxpayer. I'm not sure how he files his taxes, right? So that's the difference between marginal tax rate, your top tax bracket, and your effective tax rate. So, okay, that's fine, but how does this apply to our discussion today? Well, when you think about how much tax you'll pay now or save, depending on whether you choose a Roth or a traditional versus what you'll pay or save in retirement, you need to think about not just what your marginal tax rate is, really think beyond that. Say, okay, if I contribute to a traditional IRA or a traditional 401k, how much will I save? Now, that's where, one, you have to factor in your state income tax. But the other thing is that contribution to a 401k, for example, could move you into a lower tax bracket, right? So some of that, say $17,500, if you maxed out your 401k, some of that could save you, let's say, 33% in federal income tax, but maybe it also moved you into the lower tax bracket. And so for part of that 17.5, you'll only save 28%. So it's not just a matter of thinking about your marginal tax bracket. For some people it is. For some people, you may stay in the same top tax bracket even if you contribute the full 17.5, but we ought not assume that that's the case. You may be right on the border of the next lowest tax bracket, and the contribution to a pre-tax or traditional retirement account can move you down to that lower bracket. And the same thing is true when we think ahead in terms of retirement. When you withdraw from let's say, a traditional 401k, it's not necessarily the case that all of that with that distribution in a given year will be taxed at your top tax bracket, right? It could span multiple tax brackets. The other thing we may not know is what other income you'll have in retirement that could move you up into higher tax brackets. Will you have a pension? Will you work part-time and earn income? How much Social Security will you receive, and will some of it be taxable? All of these other types of income could move the withdrawals you make from your 401k into higher tax brackets. So the long and short of it is there are a lot of factors to consider when you think about both, the taxes that you're going to either save or pay now, depending on what you choose, and the taxes you'll save or pay in retirement. And, this is one of the things where we just need to embrace and understand what we know and accept what we don't know. We can try to make reasonable guesses, and those are going to be different from one person to the next, depending on all kinds of factors. Like I said, will you have a pension? Will you work during retirement? Where will you live? How much will you have in Roth versus traditional? And what will your required minimum distribution be with your traditional accounts when you hit 70 and a half? So there's sort of a lot of moving parts, and that's why this issue can get so complicated. I've mentioned my sort of rules of thumb. What I'm hoping to do today is walk through some examples to show you why I have those rules of thumb. But the key for you is to take all this information and make the best choice you can for you. And again, you may want to talk to a CFP because they have computer models that they can run on a lot of this stuff. But keep in mind, though, they don't know any more about the future tax laws than you and I do. So no matter how you make this decision and no matter how much help you get, it's going to be, we're not going to be able to make this decision with, perfect knowledge. We just can't. Okay, so with that, I want to walk through a number of examples. And what I'm going to do, just to simplify this, is I'm going to assume a 25% tax rate, both when we're making contributions and when we take the money out in retirement. That's state, federal, Martian tax, whatever tax we have. I'm just using 25% as an example to make the math simple and to walk through it. And the first thing I thought I would do is a very simple example to show you the power of a traditional IRA versus just a taxable account. Why is it just a traditional IRA, or again, it could be 401k? Why is that valuable? I know I don't have to pay taxes now, but so what? I got to pay them eventually. So how does it help me? So let's just go through a real simple example. Let's imagine that you're going to put aside $10,000 in a 401k, and you're at a 25%. You're going to save 25%, right? That's the tax rate. So if instead of doing that, you wanted to put it in a taxable account now, this is not a Roth, this is just a straight up taxable account. Well, you'd have to pay tax on that $10,000, of course. Tax rate's 25%, so that would leave you with $7,500, right? So we're going to compare that. $10,000 invested in a 401k, traditional 401k, and the after tax of that, $7,500 invested in just a taxable account at wherever, Betterment, Vanguard, wherever. And we're going to assume, just again to kind of keep the math simple, that both are invested in the same way, and they go up 4x. They go up 4 times over, it doesn't matter what period of time. And so the 10,000 becomes 40, the 7,500 becomes 30, right? Now, how much do we have? Well, we got to factor in taxes, right? So we know on the traditional 401k, that's easy. When we start withdrawing that 40 grand, we're going to have to pay taxes on it, right? 25% is what we're assuming. The same rate we had when we put the money in. 25% of 40,000 is 10 grand. You may not pay it all in 1 year, right? It could be spread out over a number of years. But again, we're just trying to keep the example here simple. 10,000 in taxes, that leaves you with an after-tax amount of 30 grand. That's your traditional 401k. You started with 10, it was pre-tax, went up to 40. You pay 25% or 10 grand in taxes, and you're left with 30 grand. All right, so let's compare that to the taxable account. So we know right away the taxable account's not going to be as good, right? Because we started with 7,500, went up 4 times, just like our 401k investment. That left us with 30. Well, we ended up with 30 after tax in the 401k. In the taxable account, we have 30, but we haven't paid any taxes yet. So we know the taxable account's not going to be as good. Now, how do the taxes work? Well, we invested $7,500, and that was after tax. So that's our basis. We don't have to pay tax on that again. But we have to pay tax on the gains, $22,500, right? Now, in the real world, you're going to pay a little bit of taxes every year on a taxable account as you pay dividends or as you earn dividends, right? And there could be some capital gains, particularly in a mutual fund or even an ETF. We don't need to get on all those complications. It's enough to know that we're going to have to pay some taxes. And the question then becomes, well, what's our tax rate? Well, I decided to assume 20% for capital gains. Now, that's probably not quite right. I mean, the federal rate's already 20%, but it depends on how much money you make, and then you've got a state capital gains tax and all of that. But I decided to make it 20%. It's not totally unrealistic, but I wanted to make it a little bit less than what you pay on ordinary income, the 25% tax rate that I assumed, just to try to help out the taxable account, just to give it all the help I could. So what's the tax going to be? Well, remember, our basis was $7,500. That's what we put in after-tax dollars, right? And we ended up with 30. So we take our 30,000. That's our total account. We're going to subtract out our basis, which is $7,500. That leaves us with $22,500. So we're going to have to pay tax on that amount. We're going to assume that it's all capital gains long term. So what's the 20% of $22,500? Well, it's $4,500. So we subtract our $4,500 from $30,000. And we're left with $25,500 in our taxable account after taxes versus $30,000 in our example, a traditional pre-tax 401k. So I kind of start that. I know that doesn't answer the question traditional versus Roth, but I wanted to just lay it out there how important it is to take advantage. We're going to get into Roth versus traditional, fine, but taking advantage of these retirement accounts, whichever way you end up going, is huge. It makes a big difference because the reason is, yes, you have to pay taxes when you retire, but until then, you get to hold on to that money and allow it to work for you. And in our example, it was just 10 grand up to 40, but think about a lifetime of investing, 10, 20, 30, 40 years, the power, the increase in purchasing power you'll have from taking advantage of some kind of retirement account. So I wanted to kind of start there as just a very simple example of why a retirement account is superior to a taxable account when it comes to after-tax dollars in retirement. Okay, so now let's get into what we're really talking about today, Roth versus traditional. Again, I'm going to start with a very simple example. And what I'm going to assume is that we can invest I'm going to use the same number, $10,000 in a 401k. So what does that tell us? That means we're not maxing out our 401k, right? The max contribution in 2014 is $17,500 if you're under 50. We're going to assume you can't max out, right? You're not there yet. Fine. So you can contribute $10,000 in a traditional 401k. So if you were going to instead, and that's all you can manage right now. Fine. So if instead you say, well, how do I compare that to a Roth? Well, if you're going to put that money in a Roth, you'd have to pay taxes on it, right? We know the tax rate, 25%. So that would leave you with $7,500, the exact same number that we had in the example with the taxable account. So you've either got $10,000 in a pre-tax 401k or $7,500 in a Roth. All right, so let's compare these two. Again, we're going to just assume, just for the sake of our discussion to make the math kind of easy, that the balances in both they're invested the exact same way. They go up 4x. The $10,000 goes to 40. The $7,500 goes to 30. Now, on the 40, just like before, we got to pay taxes, right? This is the traditional pre-tax 401k. 25% of 40 is 10 grand. It leaves us with $30,000 after tax. With the Roth, we put in $7,500. It went to 30. We don't have to pay taxes on it, right? It's tax-free. So in that example, we end up with the exact same amount in after-tax dollars, $30,000. Now, let's make sure we understand what we're doing. The first assumption we made was you couldn't max out your 401k, right? And that's going to be important. It may seem unimportant as it relates to Roth versus traditional. Turns out, though, it's going to be important. That was the assumption. And if you assume that, and you assume that your tax rate when you make the contribution versus the taxes when you take the money out doesn't change, it's exactly the same, you're left with the exact amount of after-tax dollars. Now, from that, one might quickly conclude that then it doesn't matter. There's no difference. If you can't max out and your tax rate's going to be the same, or that's your belief, it'll be roughly the same, right? We can't predict this with perfectly, but we think it's roughly the same. It doesn't matter. I would say it does matter. I would say between those two, I would go with a Roth. Why? Because with a traditional, I've got that required minimum distribution, right, that we talked about. With a Roth, I don't. So I have complete control of when I take that money out of the Roth. And why not have that control if you can have it? So if that were my situation, that's what I believed. I can't max out my 401k, and I think my tax rate is going to stay the same. I'd choose the Roth. But in terms of after-tax dollars, exactly the same. Don't know if that surprises any of you, but that's how the math works. Now, I've stressed this a couple of times. We didn't max out our Roth contribution or our 401k, and you might be thinking, okay, I know something's coming. That must make a difference. Well, it kind of does. So we're going to go to the third example now, and we're going to assume that you can max out a Roth 401k. All right, so what's that mean? Well, we know that the max contribution for a Roth is the same as the max contribution for a traditional or pre-tax, right? For a 401k, it's $17,500. So in order to put $17,500 in a Roth, you've got to, of course, make more than that, right? Because you got to pay taxes first. And if we assume a 25% tax rate, the question becomes, well, how much do I have to make before tax so that when I pay my 25% in taxes, I'm left with $17,500? Well, it's actually pretty easy math. I say that, I hope I get it right. So here's what you do. You take the 17.5, right? That's what you want to contribute after tax, and you divide by 1 minus your tax rate. Tax rate's 25%. 1 minus 25% is 75%, or 0.75. So I'm going to divide by 0.75. I'm doing this on my little calculator, make sure I get it right. Comes out to $23,333.33. That's what you would have to make before taxes, then pay 25% of that amount in taxes to be left with $17,500. And I can check my math. I'll take this number and I'll just multiply it by 0.75, and it should come out, sure enough, 17.5. So that's how you do it, and that would leave you with $17,500 to put in a Roth 401k. Now, how do we compare that to trying to do the same thing with a traditional pre-tax 401k? Well, really straightforward. With the Roth, we started with $23,333, right? We had to pay taxes first, and what was left, we put into the Roth. With a traditional 401k, if we started with $23,333, the same number, and we put $17,500 of that in a traditional 401k, that would leave us with $5,833. Now, let me just say, first of all these numbers will be in the show notes, so I'd kind of let these just roll past you, listen to them, and let them roll past you if you want. You can check out the show notes for the details. But let's think about that for a minute. Well, the 17.5 we put in the traditional 401k, that's no taxes on that. We're good there, right? We don't have to pay taxes in a traditional pre-tax 401k. But then we have this extra money that's gone when we contribute to a Roth, right? This $5,833. What do we do with that? Well, we got to pay taxes on it, right? So if we pay 25% tax on that $5,833, it leaves us with $4,374.75. That's after-tax money that we can now invest in a taxable account, right? Now, it's possible you could put that in an IRA, right? Depending on your circumstances and whether that IRA is deductible. For our purposes, though, I'm just going to assume you can't. It's going to go into a taxable account. Now, that's extra money that you didn't have with the Roth, and one might think that might be enough to tip the scale in favor of a traditional or pre-tax 401k. We're going to look at those numbers. Turns out, not quite. So how does this work? Let's start with the Roth because that's the easy one, right? If we start with $17,500, we're just going to assume it goes up 4x like we did before. That goes to what? $70,000. And it's tax-free. That's all yours. That's easy, right? Start with $17,500 in a Roth, goes up 4x over some number of years. You're left with $70,000 in retirement, and it's It's tax-free, so it's all yours. How do we compare that to the traditional 401k? Well, we got to do a couple of steps. So the first one is the 17.5 in the 401k. Again, we're going to make things fair. Goes up the same amount to $70,000, but now we got to pay taxes, right? So 25%. That leaves us with $52,500. Of course, obviously, that's not as much as 70, but that's okay. We got this 43, 74, and 75 cents sitting in our taxable account. We're going to assume same investment goes up 4 times, leaves you with $17,498, but you got to pay some taxes. You don't have to pay taxes on the initial investment, but you do have to pay taxes on your gains. Remember, I was assuming a 20% rate, and that takes the taxes out of that $17,498. So the way I would figure that out, just to give you the math, is I'd take the account balance, $17,498. I've done this math, but I'm punching it into a calculator as I walk through it. Subtract my basis, the after-tax dollars that I invested, of 43, 74, 75, right? That gets my gain, $13,123 and 25 cents. And now what's my tax on that? Well, I'm assuming a 20% tax rate. So that gets me a total tax of $2,624.65. The long and short of it is, on the taxable account, you walk away with $14,873.35. You add that to your $52,500 that you have from your 401k after tax, and your total, it ain't $70,000. It's $67,373.35. In this case, the Roth won out. This is where we assume the same tax rates now and in retirement, and we assume you can actually max out your Roth 401k to the tune of $17,500. Why? Given that the interest rates or the tax rates were the same, why does it make a difference just because we can max out our Roth? Well, there's a couple of things going on. The first is, yes, we do get some extra money to invest in a taxable account when we use a traditional 401k. But remember, that money first, it doesn't get the advantage of either a pre-tax or a Roth, right? Because that extra money we got, that $58.33, it gets taxed when we get it, just like a Roth. But then the gains also get taxed, right? So we get taxed now, and the gains get taxed later. And those taxes are what make the difference. The other thing is, if you think about it, when you invest in a traditional retirement account, say $17,500 this year in a traditional 401k, while all that money's in your account, it's under your name, your social security number, you're feeling good, it ain't all yours. Some of it belongs to Uncle Sam. You may not have to pay Uncle Sam for 40 years, but some of that money, whatever your tax rates are going to be in retirement, we're assuming 25%, actually belongs to Uncle Sam, not you, right? So you really haven't put away $17,500 for your retirement. You've put away a smaller amount than that, and you've socked away 25% in our hypothetical for Uncle Sam. With a Roth, 100% of what you've put in that 401k belongs to you. So you're able to actually protect more money within a retirement account with a Roth than you are with a traditional 401k. Now, we could have changed the assumptions, right? I could have, the $58.33 that was taxable, maybe you can put the $5,500 of that in a deductible IRA, right? Where only a small fraction then of what's left, $333, would actually be subject to tax and put in a taxable account. And would that even the playing field? It would, except that in that hypothetical, we could just assume you could also contribute $5,500 to a Roth as well, right? And we could just extend the hypothetical out. But the same principle would remain. If you can max out your Roth contributions, a Roth is actually better than a traditional IRA or 401k, assuming your tax rates are going to be the same both now and when you retire. I put the difference, if you think the tax rates are going to be actually lower in retirement by, say, 3 or 4%, that's usually just the math that I've done, what it takes to sort of even the playing field. But if they're going to be the same and you can max out your Roth 401k, actually the Roth, in my opinion, is better. And if I go back to my general rules of thumb, that's one of the reasons that I think generally if you're in those middle tax brackets, particularly sort of the lower end of those middle tax brackets, 25%, maybe even into 28%, I personally would lean towards the Roth because I figure, well, if I think my retirement tax rates are going to be roughly the same, and I can max out my Roths, then I think I'm going to be in a better position. And if I can't max them out, I'm not going to be in a worse position. We covered that before in the second hypothetical. So to me, that's sort of the why I come to the general rules of thumb that I have. Now, for you that don't like math, I mean, at this point, your eyes can have probably rolled back into your head, and I get that. But the reality is, if you want to make the decision that's best for you, you need to sit down and figure out the numbers. If you want help, I highly recommend talking to a CFP or folks at your 401k or your IRA. I guarantee you, folks at Vanguard or Betterment or Fidelity or T. Rowe Price, I mean, all these places, Schwab, they will be more than happy to help you walk through these issues, and you need to take advantage of that. I mean, that's if there's any takeaway from this, it's to alert you to the fact that there can be real tangible differences in retirement based on the decisions you make now. I've given you my thinking on it, but it may not be right for you. I've given you some math behind my thinking as to why I have these sort of general rules of thumb, but they're my general rules of thumb. What's right for you could be very, very different. And this is something you need to think through yourself, take advantage of the help that's out there. I know I've talked to folks at Vanguard, and they're extremely helpful. I have an inherited IRA, which is a whole different kind of animal, and they've been extremely helpful with that. So take advantage of this help. Be aware of the issue, be aware of the math, be aware of the issues that you need to think through. Hopefully, this podcast will help you do that. There are a lot of other great resources online that will, and then get the help you need. It's really, really important. Now, I've kind of walked through in some detail all of this, but there's two other really important things in this conversation about Roth versus traditional that I want to cover. The first is this. As you probably know, you can take a traditional IRA, a pre-tax IRA, and convert it to a Roth if you want to. When you do that, you got to pay taxes. So if you convert a $100,000 traditional IRA to a Roth, you got to pay taxes on that $100,000, whatever your tax rate is, right? That opens up some real interesting possibilities. And I want to give you one scenario. It's one that I plan on taking advantage of if it makes sense. And it's this. Imagine you're in a top tax bracket, whatever it is, but you're just, it's too high, you think, to justify a Roth. You need that. You're going to get a lot of tax breaks with a pre-tax IRA or 401k. So you do that. You go with the traditional. Well, what might happen is there could come a time before you retire when your tax rates go down, right? A common example of this is someone who maybe in their 60s, they retire, maybe they don't have a pension, and they're going to hold off taking Social Security. So they're going to live on some taxable investments that they have. And what's going to happen during those years? Well, their tax rate's going to plummet because they're not generating a lot of income, right? Well, what a great opportunity to convert some of your traditional 401ks and IRAs into Roths. Yes, you'll pay taxes on it, but you'll pay taxes at a much lower rate than you were paying when you made the contribution. So take an extreme example. Imagine you're paying 39.6% and you're in a high state with high income tax. So that, by contributing to a traditional or pre-tax, you're saving 40+%. Boy, that's hard to pass up. But then, when you're in your 60s, 65, whatever, maybe you retire, and you don't have a lot of taxable income for a few years. So your tax rate dips 10%, 15%, 25%, much lower, whatever it might be. A great opportunity to convert some of those traditional pre-tax accounts into a Roth. Again, you'll pay taxes, but it could be a lot lower than you'll pay if you wait until you hit that 70.5 and you hit the required minimum distribution, particularly if you have a lot saved in your accounts. That could put you in much higher tax bracket. So that's one strategy that I'm very focused on. One of the things you're going to have to consider if you do that is exactly how much do you convert each year and in total. The funny thing is if you convert too much, then your required minimum distribution from your traditional accounts will, of course, go down because they're now lower. They could go down so low that your tax rate after you start taking your RMDs is actually now almost too low, and you would have been better off converting maybe a little less. Again, this is where a CFP or other retirement specialist can be a huge, huge help. But I want to alert you to that. It's a strategy that I think can help a lot of people, particularly those who are in income tax brackets where it just doesn't, a Roth just right now doesn't make sense. Well, it may make sense later as part of a Roth conversion. That's the first thing I wanted to mention. The second thing is something that I've talked about before, and it's a backdoor Roth. I talked about this in podcast 40, DoughRoller.net/podcast 40. And it's ideal for those that maybe their income disqualifies them from a Roth IRA. They can't contribute to a deductible IRA, perhaps because of their income and their retirement plan at work. Well, anybody can contribute, assuming you have earned income, to a non-deductible IRA. And then what you can do is convert it to a Roth. So now there's a whole bunch of issues here. You've got to look at what's called the Rata Rule. If you have other IRAs that are pre-tax, you can't just convert the after-tax IRA and ignore the pre-tax IRA. So there are a lot of issues with this strategy. That's why I talked about it in podcast 40. So you want to give this a lot of thought before you execute this strategy. But it can be a great way to invest for a long time with earnings that are never taxed. You compare that to simply putting the money in a taxable account where you're obviously going to pay tax on the dividends, you're going to pay tax on the capital gains, including when you ultimately sell, say during retirement. But with a backdoor Roth, you can shield more money from taxes. And if you do it right, when you convert, you'll owe very little taxes because you will have just made the contribution to the traditional non-taxable or non-deductible IRA. And so that's already been taxed. And when you convert it, you're only taxed on your gains, if any. And if you set up the account and then convert it shortly thereafter, you probably don't have any gains. And for that matter, depending on the market, you could have even some losses. So you can convert to a backdoor Roth with very little tax liability. Again, there are a lot of issues to think through with the backdoor Roth. Listen to podcast 40 if it's of interest to you, and then get the advice you need before making any decisions from a professional. But I want to make sure that option was out there so people understood it. So, I know we've been through a lot today. This is a really important issue, and it's something that I didn't get right always. I flubbed it. I missed the opportunity for a backdoor Roth since 2010, and I'm kicking myself. And I've mentioned that in the past. So, I'm certainly not above making big mistakes with my money, particularly as it relates to the Roth versus traditional, a very dicey issue. I've tried to walk through it in a way, well, at least in the way I understand it and the way I approach it. I hope that helps you. As always, if you have a different approach, or if you think I've missed an issue, or you think there's other things that folks should consider, shoot me an email. Would love to hear from you, dr@DoughRoller.net. That's how we all learn, right? That's how we figure this stuff out. You guys have been tremendous with the emails you've sent me. You hear it. I mentioned on the show, just like at the top of this show, what Lauren had to offer. Great tip that I had no idea about, getting a free Morningstar premium membership from T. Rowe Price. I had no idea. So the same can be applied here to Roth and traditional IRAs and 401ks. So if you have any ideas, great resources, tips, whatever, would love to hear from you. Again, at DoughRoller.net. And the show notes for this episode, of course, you can get at DoughRoller.net/podcast90, podcast 90. They're going to be important. I will walk through the math that I've kind of run through in this podcast with you, and so you can see that there. Check those out again, DoughRoller.net/podcast90. Well, that brings this episode to a close. Look forward to hearing your comments on it. Email dr@DoughRoller.net. Until next time, remember, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom.